Really, when I think about masculinity, especially like patriarchal masculinity, let me specify, or some people might call it toxic masculinity. There's so many names for it these days. Um, it's really this standard of manhood that no one can reach. It's the idea that in order to be a real man, you need to be buff. You got to be like a lifter. You have to like sports. You have to be a ladies' man. You have to have a large penis. You have to be confident. Like you have to do all these things. It's like a never-ending checklist, and it's impossible to check off all the boxes. We're here.
Yeah, I guess I'll open it a bit to see if there's anything you'd like to add and share about yourself.
Yeah, or I guess I'll share how I kind of got on this path. I'm from St. Paul, Minnesota. For people who are not familiar with Minnesota, yes, Black people do live there. Anytime I would travel, people are like, wow, there's Black people there. And I'm like, yes, there is. There's a lot. I actually grew up in a historic Black neighborhood in St. Paul. Though it's predominantly Black, it's super diverse. So for context, like the doctor who delivered me lived across the street. So did the city's first Black mayor, who's currently the mayor, Melvin Carter, lived across the street before he became mayor. So like you have all these like elite, really dope Black folks who live in this community, but then like you go down the street, there's a liquor store, everybody sells drugs in a liquor store, and it's a neighborhood that's full of a lot of different things. And I was so shaped by this neighborhood, seen a lot of things in this neighborhood, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So the drugs, seeing people impacted by violence, gun violence, gang violence, like all the things. And for a while, I really thought something was wrong with my community. In fact, I only went to college because I kind of wanted to get away. College was like my escape plan. And really, as I was going through, I wanted to be a teacher, and I was exploring education in youth. I was really trying to figure out, wait, what's wrong with us? What's wrong with us? Like, why statistically do we have all these numbers and imbalances? But then I started asking a different question, and I stopped asking what's wrong with us, because I realized nothing was wrong with us. But then I started asking what happened to us. And that led me on a path of really thinking about masculinity and how the way that some people learn what it is to be a man is traumatic. It's heartbreaking. The stories that not only that I have, but the stories my friends have. And that's kind of how I got on this journey, really trying to think about, okay, so we see certain behaviors in men. There's certain things we talk about, had a lot of women friends growing up, a lot of things that they talk about. And I wanted to start thinking about, well, what are the experiences that are shaping some of these behaviors that we talk about?
Yeah, thank you for sharing some of your background and origin story. I'm curious, as you've begun this investigation, both of community, the people around you, how has that also gone inwards too? How do you balance that?
Oh gosh, it's so hard. It's so hard. It is very easy to talk about masculinity, like really easy, right? I've read the things, I can say a lot. Practicing it is still hard, and I think I never want to present myself as this person who has arrived, but there's a story that comes to my mind in my book. I remember writing a chapter on fatherhood, and it was a very tricky chapter to write. My dad's a pastor, very well known in the community, and I wanted to be honest to my lived experience, but I also wanted to like honor that is my dad, and I'm not going to just, say you did everything wrong and that type of stuff. But I remember talking about how my dad didn't really show me a lot of affection. And I tell a story of graduating from high school, getting ready to move to college, and he comes into my room and he shakes my hand and he said, "It was so nice having you here." Now, and he probably said it a little different. He was like, Destyn, it was nice having you here. And he shook my hand. And if you know my dad, this man who grew up in the 50s, that meant a lot to him. He grew up in a time where your handshake is your word. But I was still hurt by that moment. I think I remember wanting to hug my dad. I remember wanting to feel his embrace. I wanted him to tell me that he was proud of me. I wanted to hear him say, I love you. I know he loves me, but we didn't grow up with that being our habit. My dad read the book. I think he really struggled with reading it, but I remember he gave me a hug. And, you know, he essentially started to say, I just want you to know that, like, if I would have known that that's what you needed, I would have never withheld that from you. And even now, I notice little things where he hugs me. And what's tough is that I also have to realize that I can't fully put all the responsibility on him for how he shows up. That as a son, like, how do I show affection towards my father, and not just waiting and not just mirroring the affection that my father shows me, but taking ownership in my adulthood and choosing, like, when he reaches for the handshake, like, no, I'm a hug you because that's what I want to do. So I think that's where it gets hard, where the stuff can be so simple in many ways and yet so hard to talk or so hard to practice the things that we talk about.
Yeah. Wow. That's a really powerful moment and a really cool evolution for how your relationship has changed through your work. And I think a theme that I hear a lot is that a lot of the those desires are mutual and right under the surface. And then there's just this layer that needs some activation energy from one of the parties to spur something.
Yep.
But I think if there were a more common acknowledgement that, like, this is what we want as humans, and if we just pushed a little bit past the uncomfortableness of uncertainty, that there's a lot of connection, like, just under the surface.
Oh, absolutely. It reminds me, when I was working in higher ed, I oversaw a living learning community for Black and African American men. And some of the young men that I worked with were very just like, you know, they wanted to be real tough, and they would do this thing where they would sit in my office. We would be talking about their grades. They'd be like, yeah, I'm doing great. Like, I got all A's. They didn't know that I could actually see in the university system. But anytime we would have these group gatherings, you know, they used to be so closed off. But I just would always aspire to be an icebreaker. And that would often show up in just a little disclosure of, like, I would tell them embarrassing stories from work. I would say, hey, like, I'm really anxious today. And the more that I started to share, they started to mirror that and reflect that. And you're so right. Like, I think a lot of people are yearning for this type of connection, and it really just takes someone who's willing to take that first step.
Yeah, and the other piece that can contribute to that first step that I want to touch on is, like, space and community. So you mentioned your father is a pastor, and that's a space. So I'm curious, both, this is kind of a two-part question, both that space in particular, a community of faith, and then kind of more generally, like, a space for healing and connection. That could be anything.
Yeah, for sure. Fascinatingly, the church that I grew up in is really bad at this. They're going to see this probably, and I love them. I remember, you know, the church has, like, this men's ministry, and I remember going to one of the men's meeting. I actually almost wrote about this in the book, and they were so mad. Like, they were mad because they felt like their time was being wasted in this 1 hour meeting that happened once a month. And what a lot of them were expressing was, like, I want to get to know people. I remember there was this one guy, I think his name is Brother Phil, and I feel bad that I don't even know his name because he's been at that church for a long time. But that's an example. And I remember he never really talks. He raised his hand and he shook the whole room because he was like, you know, like, I don't really know y'all. Like, I speak to you all, I see you all, but I don't really know you all. And everyone's frustrated because they want this to be a space where they can be vulnerable, where they can build community, where they can have fun, where they can get to know each other. But they really struggled with the how to do that. Eventually, I ended up leading just kind of like a small group, but it was really just like a check-in thing with them. It wasn't even really religious. We were just talking about how our week was. all I did was have them sit in a circle, because before they're sitting in these rows and pews where you can't even see everyone. And it was different. And I asked them an icebreaker question. I said, rosebud thorn of the week. A simple thing, right? What's going well? What's not going well? What are you looking forward to? And it was one of the most fruitful meetings that we've had. So I've always appreciated the church's potential to be a space for community and healing. And I think it is that, especially in Black communities where your faith community is kind of like your one-stop shop for everything. Like if you need a resource, you're not going to go to the county, the city, you're going to go to your pastor. That's going to probably be your triage space. But then outside of that, really for me, it's been being intentional about how I show up in my friendships, where it can get really easy to get in the habit of just sort of doing the same thing over and over with your friends, with my group of friends. You know, we all like whiskey, we all like tequila, we all like beer. And, you know, it's not that we're overdoing it, but we get in this habit of like we're playing spades and we're drinking and we're kind of talking about the same stories over and over again, but not really actually making the space to really check in on like the real things that we are dealing with and experiencing. So lately we just committed ourselves to doing a weekly Zoom call where we just check in, and it's a space where it's not about like we're going to go play a game together, but we're really just going to talk. So that's kind of what community looks like. One of the examples of what community looks like in my life.
Cool. Thank you for sharing. And I guess on the, like, do you feel that seeking out connection in a community of faith, because there's so much nuance, options, diversity in that space, is it like seeking out a community in just like in friendship in general, like, or is there an additional layer of structure that changes things?
I think there's an additional layer, and that layer usually can be shame. And it really kind of depends on what like sort of faith community people are a part of and the theology that community holds. But I think a harmful practice that I've seen is that a lot of people kind of use shame as a way of building community, where there's an ongoing joke for kids who grow up in the church that if you had a youth pastor or a youth mentor who says, let's go get coffee, that means you're in trouble. Like, that means you done did something. You went too far on Instagram with your last post, and that means you're going to get corrected. So I think there's kind of this shame and this anxiety that comes around a person wants to connect with me to correct me, not to necessarily love on me or to get to know me, but they are trying to fix something in me that I think can be a barrier, right? Because I can't show up authentically me if I am entering into a space where someone just wants to correct me or believes that I need to be fixed in some sort of way. So I think that's one of the things that can be a barrier. And I think one thing that can be an opportunity is sometimes in the Western world, I think spirituality in general is just something that we ignore, or it's not always so integrated in how we see wellness. And I think in some of these faith-based circles, like, we ask the questions like, how's your heart doing? Because your spirit is connected to your being and your well-being, sorry, I meant to say. So I do think that the door can get opened a little bit quicker without it being awkward, if that makes sense.
Yeah. The structure can help normalize something like vulnerability, or sharing with a group. And I do want to touch upon the subject of shame more deeply. I think I certainly can see the aspects of like that as a vehicle used in some like religious like morality or teachings or structure, but it's also very interwoven in with masculinity.
Oh yes.
So I'm curious, like, one avenue I can think of is like shame as the vehicle for self-improvement, where like I need to feel shame in order to be better, perform better, and that can have harmful effects. So I'm curious if there's how you view it interwoven in masculinity, other channels or vehicles it might drive?
Oh my gosh, shame and masculinity, for me personally, are so interconnected. Really, when I think about masculinity, especially like patriarchal masculinity, let me specify, or some people might call it toxic masculinity. There's so many names for it these days. It's really this standard of manhood that no one can reach. It's the idea that in order to be a real man, you need to be buff. You got to be like a lifter. You have to like sports. You have to be a ladies' man. You have to have a large penis. You have to be confident. Like you have to do all these things. It's like a never-ending checklist, and it's impossible to check off all the boxes. And some of these things aren't really in your control either. And then I think it's what happens when you don't check off those boxes and you start to question, am I good enough? Am I worthy? When I think about that, what shame is, it's that feeling of, oh my gosh, there's something wrong with me because I can't be like this man. There's something wrong with me because I'm not athletic like this guy is. Something wrong with me because I don't always feel happy like, this other guy over here. A quick story about shame. I talk about it in the book a little bit too. I tell the story of going to a doctor's appointment and looking, I'm just kind of scrolling through my chart. I'm not expecting anything. So I'm like, we're good. And then it gets to hepatitis C and this screen says positive. And I'm like, what? Now, mind you, I barely even know what hepatitis C is. I look it up and I see how people get it. And I'm like, oh, okay, so sharing needles, more common with men who have sex with men. And I instantly start thinking, oh my gosh, if people find out, what are they going to think about me? But the power of shame, I remember, long story short, I ended up finding out that it was a false positive. So I didn't have it. But I remember feeling pain in my body. Like, I literally remember starting to feel sick, like starting to feel like something was wrong. I remember my wife and I were at a party, a little gathering with her cousins, and Spotify was playing. They didn't have the premium. It was cheap. So a commercial came on, and it was like a hepatitis C commercial. And I swear it felt like the room went silent, and the commercial was the loudest thing in the world. Now, mind you, I probably heard that commercial before and never paid attention to it, but that's kind of the power of shame. I was feeling things in my body that wasn't even real. It was funny because I can't really remember fully what I would feel, but I remember where I was feeling pain isn't even where I would feel anything. And it was all shame. It was all this fear and this question is, if this test result is positive, am I worthy of being loved? Do I still have the same worth? Am I still going to be accepted? Are people going to look at me differently? So if that's just the impact that, someone might feel for a false positive result, I think about the daily shame that people feel when they are living in a constant comparison to other men.
Yeah, and I also think one of the effects of having something like that checklist where it's only deemed success if all of them are checked is that it's very brittle, in the sense that when things negatively impact your life, as they inevitably do as you go out and live your life, it doesn't allow you to overcome those obstacles and challenges.
Yeah.
Because it's just a ding against the checklist that you can't beat. So it could be something like a test result. You're just going about your life and you're either, maybe it's a true positive and something is affecting your body. Maybe it's false positive. Either way, it just pops up as things do in your life.
Yeah.
And because it's just a demerit on your checklist, it just immediately makes it more difficult to actually overcome it.
Absolutely. And it kind of pushes you into hiding. I think about when you don't check a box, like it kind of makes you hide other aspects of yourself. If you feel like you can't reach this goal or you can't be this, then you start to hide more of who you actually are, or you maybe start to perform to appear to check off a box that you may not check. And while you're doing that performance, like the real core authentic you gets buried deeper and deeper.
And in the introduction of this topic, you use a few different phrases: patriarchal masculinity, toxic masculinity. Words are the way in which we communicate ideas, but they also hearken and press on different emotions that can surface for people in describing those ideas. Who does that bring in? Who does that block from hearing a message? And how do you think about language in describing these ideas?
Yes. I love the way you worded this question so much. That was so well worded. You did that. So let's say like patriarchal masculinity. Bell Hooks talks explicitly around not using, the reason why she uses patriarchal masculinity is because we're not necessarily, people aren't saying that masculinity in itself is toxic, which a lot of people use the phrase toxic masculinity, but more so talking about where this type of masculinity comes from and what it's rooted in. Patriarchy is a big word. I think it can feel like a political word. Same like feminism. Like these are all buzzwords. And what I have found in myself as a man is that at one point I hated these words, but I didn't really know what they meant. And once they were broken down for me, I was like, wait a minute, I could see this. Like patriarchy, for example. Really, when we talk about the patriarchy, we're talking about a society that is built on the belief that men are better than women. And here's one of the simple ways that we can see this belief show out. If I were to ask you in America's early founding, who had the right to vote? Men. But not just men, or, that it wasn't just men. They had to be white men. They also had to own land. So here we can see those are three different beliefs about a hierarchy and where people belong socially. Have to be a man, have to be a white man. What does that say about racial implications? And then you had to own land. What does that say about class? But it doesn't just stop there. But then the same system assigns gender to human characteristics, such as career fields or certain characteristics like dominance, leadership, confidence, because who benefits when leadership is seen as a masculine characteristic or trait? Men do. So the more I kind of started to pull back this layer, I started to see how much our society is shaped by this belief. Even being a husband and a father, it's always fascinating. I get praised a lot for being a good husband and being a good dad. And it's not that it doesn't mean anything to me, but it's also fascinating how I don't think my wife hears the same praise because she's expected to play a primary role in our child's life. She's expected to do all these things at home. If I show up to an appointment with our daughter, I've been to every single appointment. The nurses look at me like I'm the man of the year, right? Like, wow, he's going to a point. Or my wife was getting her hair done just, a few days ago. And if you're not familiar with when Black women get their hair done, it's like a long time. Like she left the house at 5:00 p.m., came back at like 2 a.m. So it's just me and my 4-month-old daughter this whole time. And, she's getting her hair done. They're braiding her hair and they're like, oh my gosh, your husband is alone with the baby for that long and he's not calling you, asking you questions. And she's like, well, it's his child too. And they're blown away. They're like, wow. Right. So me simply taking care of my daughter, the child that I helped bring into the world, that I have a lifelong commitment to, gets me a pat on the back. It gets my wife nothing. Me showing up to an appointment, even if I didn't even make the appointment, gets me a pat on the back. Me, when my wife was in labor, me not playing a game system, like, blew the nurse's mind. They're like, wow, usually like the dads are like taking a nap or they're like playing a game system. So this is all my long-winded way of saying if we want evidence for living in a patriarchal culture and society, all we have to do is just look at the way that roles are distributed, what roles are distributed to what gender, who is called out for certain things. When I worked as a diversity, equity, and inclusion trainer in a healthcare setting, I was teaching anti-racism work there, or teaching on anti-racism there. And I had colleagues who were women of color, and the things that people would say to them, ridiculous. No one ever said those things to me. Anytime they would tell a story, I'm like, I don't know what y'all doing, because no one has ever even asked me a question like that. And then again, patriarchy. Men are seen as credible. They're seen as trusted. They're seen as knowing more. I might have got off task with the question you asked, but that's kind of what came to mind.
I think it's really helpful to hear some like personal anecdote stories that listeners can relate to tie to the concepts that are hidden behind a super academic or political word like patriarchy.
Well, and to add too real quickly, I think it's important for people to know too, like I did not have male friends until I became an adult. Like, well, I had my friend Nate. Nate stuck with me for a long time.
Shout out
Nate Jackson. Shout out to Nate. They've been rocking with me since forever. But it was always hard for me to become friends with other boys in school. I mean, I could be cordial, but never like close. But I was super close to a lot of women, super close all my life. Always had a lot of women friends, and hearing the stories really shaped me and changed something in me. We're being told what they could and could not wear in their own home when certain people come over, being called fast for having a crush. So I really just got to hear the stories of women, stories that I think I wouldn't have had access to if all of my friends were boys and men. So that drastically changed a lot of things for me too.
What's been the process of making male friends as fellow adult male?
It's hard. Maybe even more hard than I would like to admit. The hard part for me is I was terrible at sports growing up, and I think that's kind of what separated me. Like when all the boys were going to basketball practice, football practice, I was kind of like, so y'all trying to watch Mary-Kate and Ashley? Like y'all trying to read the 17 magazine? So I think the topics that men usually default to, like I just don't have access to them. When people start talking about the Vikings, I'm like, I couldn't tell you. You know, I become a fan when we're doing well for like a hot second, and then I drop out. And really, it's allowing myself to be vulnerable and being okay with not knowing or not fitting in or not performing, because I do think it can get easy to jump into performance mode where you just nod and you listen for context clues and you start, you kind of join in and you fake to be interested in things. So that's what's challenging is really pushing myself to not perform and to really just be okay with being who I am, not liking certain things, and that being okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I'm poking further, like growing up, did you feel that gap? Like, was there a yearning for those male friendships, or were you able to fill like your community support system in other ways?
Oh, that's so complicated. Yes and no. I think I loved having women friends. I will say that women taught me how to be a good friend. When I think about my relationships with like my women friends, it was like you call each other just because like you ain't got nothing else to do. So you pick up the phone and you call. You're talking about all the things that are happening at school or in your life. You're sharing more personal stories. When something bad happens, you're more likely to disclose it. So I think I loved aspects of that, and I think I had a fear of men a little bit. I think hanging out with boys was scary at times, because really I think what I quickly picked up on, especially maybe it was where I grew up and where I went to school, is that so much of being a boy in those schools was about being tough. And whether you were or not, you had to perform it, because if you didn't perform it, people were going to pick on you, people were going to bully you. And I didn't like who I was when I was performing in that way. I look at my Facebook memories every day because I'm toxic like that. And I sometimes like look at the things I used to say when I'm like really performing this tough guy. And it was just really shitty stuff, like really just awful. And I didn't like it. And to be with the boys, you got to get used to that. You know, I grew up in like you got to get used to rough playing. There was a game called 60 Seconds when I was growing up where, you know, the boys would fight each other for 60 seconds. But, you know, you couldn't punch in the face, only the, you know, kind of shoulders down. I don't want to do that. that didn't sound fun. Like, can we go play the little hand games on the playground with the girls? So that there was a yearning for it because I always felt like something was wrong with me because I wasn't connecting with them. And then I think there was another piece of what it takes to be one of the boys. I just don't know if I was interested.
And now that you are in the position you are now with the life experiences you've had and the learning and the research and the work you've done, how do you see like if you had a lesson for your younger self, or what would you tell your younger self with like the hindsight that you have now? Is there anything that you would do differently with that time period that's passed and the work you've done?
Yeah. I think what I would tell myself, and what I really think I needed to hear a lot as a young person but didn't hear it enough, is that people are going to love you. People do love you. And not for the performance, but for what's under it. I think I lived a lot of my life thinking that when I performed my masculinity in certain ways, that like that is what people loved and appreciated about me. And the more I kind of started going to therapy and just getting more comfortable with myself, I learned that people don't really care. Like, I think about my friend Nate, who's been one of my closest friends for a long time. Nate's like a very stereotypical guy. You know, Nate, he likes football, hockey, all the things. Like, Nate knows that that's not my thing. And he never cared. Nate has never cared how tough I was, right? Like, none of these things have ever mattered, but I was convincing myself that they mattered a bit more than what they actually did. So I would tell myself that I'm loved. I've always have been, and that sometimes you just don't know all the people who are going to love you for you.
And I love that, by the way. And in a similar vein, like when you're interacting or working with a young person, you like both through research and lived experience, like know how a young man can feel in an environment like that, feeling the need to perform, which in certain cases, like maybe it can be like a safety thing where it's like, now is not the time to be vulnerable, or now is the time for fitting in. What advice would you share with a young person who's struggling with that tension? Like, I want to be myself. Is it seeking out the right people? Is it a confidence that, like, I don't know, outside their maybe their small school system, like there's a big world out there? Or what kind of advice would you give to that young man?
That's a great question. So I think something that was super helpful for me is just learning to name more of who it is that I am. So I think that like a thing that I like to do is like list out what are characteristics of myself, right? Like, how do I describe myself? Who am I? And the more that I can articulate it, the more that I can describe it to myself, the more real it becomes. Like, the more that I can convince my own self that this is really who I am, I think the easier that it is to live it out. Another thing I'll share is there's a poem that drastically changed my life. It's Our Deepest Fear by Marianne Williamson. Part of it says our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. We ask ourselves, who am I to be gorgeous, to be talented, to be beautiful? Actually, who are you not to be? And then later on, a part that I love the most is it says, as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give people permission to do the same. And I've just seen that be so true in my life. The more that I choose to disclose and show more of who I am, it rubs off on people. It invites people to do the same. Now, same question, but I'm going to flip it. I think the advice that I would give to youth workers, people who work with young people, is to stop trying to make young people who you think they should be, which is really hard. I think often if you look at a lot of mentorship programs, youth programs that are directed towards men, there is a pathway that they are trying to set the young men on, and really letting men become who they already are. Like, that's the job as a youth worker. It's not to make them what you think is a healthy and good version of, themselves. It's for them being able to decide and live out what healthy and whole looks like for them.
Yeah. I love the advice of even literally writing out what is the most you as like an anchoring, like these are really me. I can it being like an anchor in like turbulent waters of all the different performances you need to play to fit into different groups, but knowing that like, okay, at my core, this is mine, this is my notepad, or maybe it's in your head of like these are really me. And then with that, like developing it to become like the most maximally you is like how you strengthen it. So I love that advice because it's very individual, like tailored to whoever's doing this work, but it can kind of like shield you and strengthen you from those different pulling forces.
Absolutely. And I'll just add to it real quick too. I think a next step in that too is, once you've started to identify those things, starting to ask yourself, what are the spaces where I feel the most comfortable being this version of myself? Because sometimes I think the reality is we have to sometimes surround ourselves with, like, I chose to surround myself around more women because I was invited to be my most full self around them. And that means that I had to sacrifice certain relationships, and I wouldn't change it for anything. Right. So I think that's another piece. What are the spaces that allow me to be this person? And sometimes the more time you spend in that space, the more it becomes second nature, that now when you enter into new spaces, it's hard to perform. Right. That's what has changed so much for me, is I spend so much time in these spaces of affirmation where I'm invited to be my weird, quirky self, that now me is all I really know how to be. It's hard for me. I would tell people at work all the time, because as a trainer, I'm expected to present and talk a certain way. And I'll say, look, y'all, I talk a certain way, and I don't code switch no more. Like, maybe I used to, but I am so comfortable with me that I just forget how to turn it on.
Yep. And staying in this like system, how do you see, if at all, like moving the needle on, like if you imagine a population of young men kind of stuck in this performance, and they're like reluctantly performing and feel this yearning to be themselves, but maybe similar to you feel that they haven't really found the environment in which they can do that. Like, how do you see affecting change to improve that at all? It's a big question, and you don't need an answer. I'm just curious if you have any thoughts there.
Okay, my gut answer is probably not even going to make sense. I really believe the answer is education. And the reason why is I think how much changes when we learn that these things are socially constructed. And I know that's like a big thing, but if we really took the time to talk to young people about the social construction of gender, the social construction of race, and really start to get them, because young people can handle these type of things. I think that's like one of my biggest pet peeves, when people act like young people can't like talk about these things, because they do it all the time. But if we really start to break down these things and start asking them, okay, what are your beliefs about what it means to be a man? what is the stories that shape this belief? When did you learn this belief? Who taught you that belief? What were the consequences that you maybe experienced when you chose to not believe that thing? I think that is one of the ways that we move the needle, is really empowering young people to think more deeply about these things, and I think also seeing its interconnectedness to other systems of oppression as well too.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I think it triggers the investigation and introspection, and even the act of doing that allows someone to see that it's constructed.
Yeah,
all the pieces that feed into it. So even asking the question prompts the idea that it may not be a rigid lockbox forever.
Yeah, absolutely. Or even just ask the question, why? You know, I sometimes think about like, I mean, I like the clothes that I'm wearing today, but like there's no real reason why I have to wear pants. I have to wear this type of shirt. Like, it is all choice. Now, of course, I've been socialized to dress in certain ways, but when you really start to peel back, there's no real reason behind it beyond like, this is how we've done things, and we kind of, you know, when one generation does things one way, they pass it on to the next generation, and so on and so on. And helping people see like, you can make these own choices for yourself. It may have been taught to you that way, but if it doesn't feel good for you, you don't have to embody it in that way.
So speaking of generations, you just made a new one. So what has it been like that now you're a father and there's another generation?
Yeah.
How do you feel the weight of like the prior generations, like what you've learned, what in your role in passing on what you've learned, unlearned? Tell me how that's evolved.
Yeah, it's interesting. I always think about how different this season of life would be if I had a son, where I think I would be like forced to confront some things a little bit more. But one thing I do think about now is like, what does it mean to be a nurturing father? Because I think it's going to be important for my daughter to just know a father that is nurturing, that is caring. That's what comes to my mind. And also, I think a quick tangent on generation things. I think, too, that something that I'm trying to be careful or think if I want to say this.
We can take it out later.
Okay. Well, I do believe this to be true. I think we sometimes like overemphasize these like generational differences. And I think we don't always examine where does generational trend research come from? This is like all about marketing. This is not really about defining and trying to understand young people. This is really, or understand generations. It's really about understanding how do we sell things to them. So sometimes I think there are I don't know all the lingo on this stuff, but like the manosphere and all the like red pill stuff. I think we like, yes, there are a lot of young men who are into that. And there are so many young men that I've met, especially when I was working in higher ed, who are challenging this very system. And I wish we brought them to the table more to see what can we learn from them. Because I believe youth are the now. And I think there's so many youth who are resisting patriarchy, young men who are resisting it in really radical ways, but that's just not always amplified enough.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's like trusting young people to do their investigations and come to their own conclusions.
Yep.
Is an important piece of it. Like you said, marketing is also an important piece of it and can sway minds. And I think there is an innate advantage to like the clarity that the manosphere can bring, because it's such a just cut and dry framework checklist as we talked about, while nothing about a introspective investigation is super clearly marketable. But yeah, so jumping back to fatherhood, I know you've written about the concept of tough love. How do you feel about it? I guess generally as a son and now as a father.
I can't stand tough love. I really can't. I wrestle with it. I get what people mean by it. I think it often ends up doing more harm than it does good. I'll give you an example. So I'm a musician, and when I was a young person, that was like a very big part of my life. Like, it was kind of, yeah, it was like a very, very big thing. And something my dad used to do is he would always like publicly correct me. Whether like, I could be playing at a conference at a young age, would be like a big deal, playing in front of a lot of people. Then he would publicly say something like, "You're playing too loud," or like, "You're doing too much." And I think that was kind of framed as tough love. And I received it. I get what he was trying to do in those moments, but it didn't produce positive change in me. What it produced was insecurity. Like, anytime he did, I would notice myself get less interested in music every single time. So I think that sometimes when what we think is tough love does more damage. When I was following AAU basketball team for a summer as part of research when I was in grad school, I saw a lot of tough love. I remember there was this kid who was just having a bad practice. I mean, it was just not going good. And the coaches are pushing him. They're like, come on. They're doing that coaching thing. And he breaks down. And he's like, my dad's in effing prison and da-da-da-da. And then he starts crying. And I remember the coaches respond kind of nonchalantly. They're like, that's real. But, like, this is most of these boys' story. Like, this is not unique. Like, and I think what they were trying to say is bad things are going to happen in your life. And, you have to persevere. You have to be resilient. All that beautiful. I get it. But in that case, he was hurting. And I think what he probably needed most in that moment was a hug. Someone to say, I'm so sorry that happened. I know how heavy that must feel. Not, well, you still got to keep practicing. So that's my issue with tough love, is I think while it doesn't produce the results in people. It doesn't produce y'all know what I'm trying to say. It doesn't produce the results that people think it typically does.
And it also defaults to the path of least resistance for the giver of tough love, because it's an acceptable expression of acceptable like range of emotions that are being expressed. So for those coaches, like, fitting the role of the coach is easy. Practice must go on. Emphasize grit and toughness and bravery and push on. But I mean, you can imagine the impact of like the hug and sympathy and empathy in that moment. And so I think it's even if it's not blanket harmful, it's overused in far too many contexts.
Well, and I really believe society is hard on Black boys. Black communities are hard on Black boys. I think so much of Black boyhood is shaped in this: we need to prepare you to live and exist in a world that hates you. And in that preparation, you have to get used to, it's almost like you have to get used to being harmed. You have to get used to being hurt so that it doesn't crush you in certain moments. And it doesn't make sense. Like, I totally understand it comes from a place of trauma, right? Of not wanting to see Black boys crushed. But really it comes with the denial of love. It comes with the denial of grace. It often comes with the layer of adultifying these same Black boys, holding them to standards of, like, trying to teach them adult lessons when they're 11, trying to teach them how to be a man when they're literally like 7 years old,
Yep. And going, like, taking that further, what are the effects of that kind of like behavior and perspective towards Black boys?
Oh gosh, it shows up in a lot of different ways. So if we're talking that kind of tough love preparing, Black boys for this world that hates them. I think it manifests itself often in a lot of insecurity, right? When you've been told time and time of like, you have to be twice as good, or you're kind of, it almost can kind of feel like you're being talked down to a lot. I think it can turn into defeat. I think it can turn into frustration, depression, because really your needs get ignored all the time. And then if we're thinking of like the adultification of Black boys, I think how that tends to impact, if we look at like suspensions, Black boys are suspended at alarming different rates. A lot of that is we're holding them to expectations that are that are way too high. Like often they are doing the age appropriate thing. But when you add Blackness to that, it is no longer seen as them being that age, but them being almost twice that age. We see it in the amount of Black children in the criminal justice system who are tried as adults. We see it in the difference between when law enforcement is involved, when a parent is called. Like if we were really to break, at least in Minnesota, if you were to break down like who gets suspended and who gets arrested by race, it's some ugly numbers. So that's kind of what it leads to. I think it leads us to deny grace to Black boys. We don't let them be flawed. We don't let them learn. We kind of expect them to either be perfect, or we kind of say, well, you're just like all the stereotypes and deserve to be punished.
And on the stereotypes and like media influences, like mixing with masculinity.
Yeah.
How does that contribute towards like expectations and the resulting effects on like what it means to be not just, I guess one way I was in a conversation with Dr. Brendan. He said boys are tired of being seen as problems and not people. And the way you were describing the effects on Black boys, I think that's further amplified as like a limiting factor towards like self-development and growth. What are some of the like external forces that are really systematic, like media, pop culture, that are contributing and reinforcing that?
Well, golly, this is a loaded question. My brain is going 1,000 different places. So I'm going to say a lot of things that may connect, may answer, may not. The first thought that comes to my mind is the deficit thinking that often shows up, where if you talk to a lot of Black parents, what their goals are for their Black boys is to keep them alive and to keep them out of jail and for them to maybe graduate high school. And if they did that by the time they're 18, if they didn't go to jail, they're still alive, they made it. And that's kind of wild. Like, that is kind of wild that is like, and that's why I was so seen as like a golden child, right? Like I wasn't selling drugs, didn't go to jail, graduated from college or graduated from high school, went to college. Like I did it. So that's a random tangent that comes up. When we talk about systemic factors, have you ever seen New Jack City, the movie? Okay. Well, you haven't seen it, but there's a part where a man is on trial. It's like 90s film about drug dealers, but a man's on trial for selling drugs, and he gives this long speech while he's called to the stand, and he talks about how no child when they're born says, I want to be a drug dealer. No child when they're born says, I want to be a part of a gang. Nobody says, I want to go buy a gun when they're first born. But more so, when you look at the systemic barriers that face certain communities, what choices do they have? I think we underestimate how challenging it is to overcome poverty, generational poverty, add racism to that, add other systems of oppression to that. It's hard. So I think that people are often engaging in certain behaviors because it feels like those are the choices that they have. Because they do and maybe this is going to connect it, because when they do go to their school, they're not treated like a kid. They're treated like an adult. They're suspended twice as much. They're kicked out of class. And then if they do even make it to college, right, they experience microaggressions. A message is communicated to them there that they're not wanted. Quick story. While I was working at the U, there was two in that program I was working in for black boys. There were two young men, I should say, who were in my program who came from North Minneapolis. North Minneapolis is like known as like the hood in Minnesota. It's like, one of the more rougher areas. And I remember it was maybe their first week on campus, and there was an incident where they said something that is harmful, but it's definitely like the norm in hood culture. It was a teachable moment. It was very much like hey, I know that like you've been saying this all your life, but like here's why we should maybe rethink language. I remember going to a meeting to discuss this incident, and they were literally acting like these two young men like did the most egregious thing in the world. They were talking about like getting all these different deans involved and I'm like, this is a teachable moment. And we denied them of that. And both of those young men never ended up graduating from that school. I think both of them were gone by the next semester. So this is my long-winded way of saying is that, again, going back to maybe my earlier thing where sometimes I think we look at black boys and we have this, what's wrong with y'all? Why can't y'all get it right? Why can't y'all go to college like the rest of us? But if we look at the different things that they're experiencing along the pathway, it's not that easy. I got lost in the question.
It's a better answer.
I know one of the things, too, is that we don't talk about, too, is that these stereotypes sometimes get solely seen as, like, cultural when these are stereotypes that literally come from slavery in America. Like, if we think of how we view the stereotypes surrounding black men, all of it like echoes plantation narratives where black men were reduced to their bodies. They were seen as big, as dumb, and their bodies were only useful when they were tamed by whiteness and doing something to benefit a white person, in this case, labor. Not only that, but if you look at a lot of the books that were written around that time, it portrayed black men as predators, as rapists. And like that same narrative echoes today. And there's so much even more to unpack with that, where if we do the same thing for black women, if we look at the sexy reds and the all that other stuff, like this all comes from black women historically being raped and over-sexualized on plantations. I had a history professor who once said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it sure does echo. So a lot of what our stereotypes are, they're just echoings of America's history of racism.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing. I think zooming back out, the nuance of masculinity grows even further with all of those layers. Yes. And becomes more complicated, and less time and space and safety to like take a moment to breathe and do those investigations and introspections is really a privilege, because it's a reprieve, right? And we see that being able to expand out of the rigid man box contributes to positive health and wealth outcomes.
Absolutely.
But it's a privilege to be able to take the time and space and have the safety to explore that. Like, I'm going to express myself authentically means I feel comfortable enough to do that. And if you are not exposed to environments that foster that, then you don't get a chance to do it. And so it's blocking the opportunity from reaching those better mental health and wealth outcomes by nature of not having the chance to begin those investigations.
Absolutely. You make me think, when I initially got engaged in this work, it was so much because I didn't notice a lot of Black men having this conversation. And I think there's reasons why. And this is where I think that the conversation is so layered and connected, because if we think about the system of patriarchy and what it means to be a man, all men didn't get to contribute to that definition. Black men didn't create that definition in America. White men shaped what American manhood is. And because of Black men being at a lower status in terms of their racial identity, sometimes what happens is you try to assimilate so much to another identity in order to kind of take back power. So I've met Black men who are extremely patriarchal in their thinking. And a lot of that is because, if your race has been a source for having less power and being dehumanized, you might lean into this other area that could grant you a sense of power. It's the same reason why in the early 1900s, Black people, let me not say that. We leaned heavily on Jack and Jill programs, Black Greek life, and these sort of Black elite things, because we were dehumanized everywhere we went. We needed a space where we could feel respectable. We needed organizations and things that made us feel a sense of pride and dignity, because no matter how old you were outside of that Black community, you were just a boy. Whether you were 60, 70, or 80, still just a boy. So in that regard, it's so layered, because we often forget that not all men have access and the privilege to explore masculinity safely without facing consequences.
And that brings it back full circle to those healing spaces and communities.
Yes.
Building and maintaining access to those spaces to prompt those investigations and those questions. That's why a big reason why I think media conversation is so important, to just put it out there, be free, prompt questions, prompt thinking. And it's a light lift way that we can just amplify the conversation.
Absolutely. And, you make me think of, as we were talking, a thought came to my mind is, what if part of the call to action is that rather than we create these spaces of healing where people can, what if we become that? What if it's as simple as we make the commitment that whoever we interact with that day, we're going to invite them to be their authentic self. We're going to be a space where they can be affirmed and loved regardless of how they show up that day. So it doesn't always have to be a space that we're creating, but we can take on the challenge to be that space for the men, the women, and for all humanity that we interact with.
And in the spirit of call to action, being mindful of our time, I'm just wondering if there's any other messages you want to share, where people can find you, follow along.
Absolutely. You can follow my Instagram page at Rethinking Manhood. I have a website, DestynLand.com. My book, The Rules We Live By, and I just love to connect. I'm not really a content creator. I just vibe. So don't expect consistency from me. Expect when there's a thought that you will get it.
I love that. Well, so appreciate your work, your effort, how thoughtful you are with your sharing, how open you are, sharing both personal stories, professional stories, and really appreciate you just sharing your energy with the audience. Really glad I got to meet you. They got to listen. And what a great conversation.
Likewise. Thank you for having me.